one of the big questions that I really had was like, why do you believe in God?
Yeah.
What are some good reasons to believe? And I remember what my grandfather said. He said that God is love. And wherever you see love, you
Mm.
are seeing a reflection of God.
Well, welcome to the True Man Podcast. I'm excited to talk about today's topic with guest Stephen Arms. And the topic is rite of passage. Now, this is what a boy goes through before entering manhood. Now, many of you know Paul Bailey, who helped me start the podcast. He has a son as well. And strangely enough, he had contacted me about 3 to 4 days before Stephen did and said, Mike, I'm looking for a book that I can walk through with my son. And do you know of one? And I'm like, that's a great question, Paul. I don't know. And so he went on this journey to try to find one. And it was just a handful of days later where the guest today reached out to me and contacted me. Now, fortunately for me, I know God brings things into your life when you need them the most. And so, boom, here you are. We're on today's podcast getting ready to talk about what I think is a very important topic and one it feels like we may not pay enough attention to. So welcome to the True Man Podcast, Stephen Arms. Now, Stephen co-authored the book with his father, Milestone to Manhood, a Christian rite of passage to help your 13-year-old son make the leap from boyhood to manhood. Stephen shares his firsthand experience of his rite of passage weekend and how it shaped him into the man he is today, and provides other fathers with tools needed to organize a rite of passage for their own sons. Stephen, thanks for being on the True Man Podcast. Awesome to have you here.
Mike, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you bet. So, Stephen, I'm going to jump right in with having you explain what a rite of passage is, because after Paul and I had this conversation about, books, I'm like, how many guys really know about this? And I was out on a Facebook group, and I got to tell you, there were a lot of people that didn't know what a rite of passage is. So it's probably a good place to start today, just explaining, well, what is this?
Sure. So a rite of passage in our context is an event that a boy can look back on in his life and know that was the moment that I became a man. When we look at other cultures, we see that they have other rites of passages. The most well known is probably the Jewish bar mitzvah.
Yep.
Another example would be the Aboriginal walkabout in Australia, where a boy is sent off into the wilderness for 3 to 6 months at a time to survive on his own. And when he comes back, he's no longer considered to be a boy, but he's a man and he's eligible for marriage. And as you were talking about, Mike, modern Western society doesn't really have an equivalent coming of age ceremony or a rite of passage for boys.
Kind of feels like we give you a pat on the back and say, hey, you're in the club, right?
Well, I think that most guys don't even get that, no one, most guys today have never been told from another man, hey, I just want you to know, I consider you to be a man now too. Most boys don't ever get something like that. And so boys are left with trying to prove their manhood to themselves because their fathers never told them. And the way that a teenage boy is going to try to prove his manhood to himself is either pornography, the sexual conquest of women, she made a man out of me. Another way they try to prove their manhood to themselves is video game addictions. In a lot of video games, you can literally slay a dragon. That totally plays into that masculine ego.
I never thought about that, but that's good.
Other examples,
good, but
yeah, not good, but
yeah.
Other examples would be like joining a gang or getting into violence, physically dominating another man to prove your own manhood. These are all ways that boys ultimately are trying to prove their manhood to themselves. And what we argue in the book is that if a father just takes the initiative to bestow the title of man on his son, then teenage boys don't feel the need to try to prove their manhood to themselves.
Oh boy. What a wonderful explanation. How do you think, in your experience, that has shaped you going through that process?
For sure. So I'll start by, for your listeners, saying that when I was 13 years old, my dad held a rite of passage for me. And we can talk about what that rite of passage looks like. But I would say I had two kind of major takeaways from my rite of passage.
Mm.
The first was that as a teenager, I was very confident in my masculine identity. And I don't mean to say that I was like some stud teenager with his, chest puffed out or something like that, But what I mean by that is when I was growing up, you know, inevitably there were teachers or other parents and Boy Scouts who would say, something offhanded like, boys, please settle down. And anytime another parent referred to me as a boy, the first thought in my mind was, I'm not a boy, I'm a man because my dad
Wow.
told me I'm a man. This other adult just doesn't know. It's not their fault. They just don't know what my family did for me.
Yeah.
So that's the first kind of big way that it affected my life, was giving me that confidence that I am a man. And I would say the second way that it really impacted my life was, one thing during the Rite of Passage weekend that gets brought up a lot from the dad and from the other men, because it's not just the dad who attends these weekends, there's other male mentors that are involved as well. One thing that keeps on getting brought up is, now that you are a man in this family, you have 24-hour access to any of us. If you ever need to talk about things, or if you're having questions or going through a rough time in your life, please come to us for advice, because we love you unconditionally. We have your best interest at heart.
Mm.
And we will never judge you. We're your family. Please come to us if you need help as you enter into this new stage of manhood. And as a 13-year-old, I didn't really understand how valuable that would be. But it wasn't until I got to college, I started to meet people who had different beliefs than me, who were raised differently than me. And it really made me question the way that I was raised in my own beliefs. I think that a lot of people can relate to that. College is kind of that make or break time in a lot of kids' lives. And I was really nervous to talk to my parents to say, I'm not sure that I believe in God anymore. I
Mm.
didn't want to disappoint them. I wasn't sure how they would react. But ultimately, I remembered back to this Rite of Passage weekend that I had as a 13-year-old, and how all these men had said, please come to us if you are ever having questions, if you need advice, we will help you. We have your best interest at heart. And that gave me the confidence to go back to my dad and to my grandfather and to ask them those deeper questions in life. Why do you believe in God? What is the purpose of life? And they weren't able to answer all of my questions at the
Yeah.
time, but they were able to share more about their own personal faith journeys and how they got to where they are. And, hindsight is 2020. I don't know what would have happened otherwise, but I would say that there's a good chance that without this Rite of Passage weekend, I would not be a practicing Christian today.
Wow. Seriously, what an incredible story. And I just had so many thoughts going through my head listening to what you were saying, because wow, so many men have never, first of all, received the invitation that you received when you were 13, and it directs their whole life. And then, to 6 or 7 years later, or however many years it was, you really accepted that invitation. And, but, what an incredible story of, receiving when you needed it, when you had those questions, and going back and asking for more. When you, even though they weren't able to answer all your questions, They definitely must have put enough meat on that bone to get you curious. So talk about that a little bit.
So I would say, one of the big questions that I really had was like, why do you believe in God?
Yeah.
What are some good reasons to believe? And I remember what my grandfather said. He said that God is love. And wherever you see love, you
Mm.
are seeing a reflection of God. And it's a very simple definition of God. There's more to him. He is love, but he's also justice. And there's that balance between love and justice. He's also a Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So there's a lot there. But as a 20-year-old college student, I needed to start all over back at the basics again, And what he said is that God is love. And he said that, if you define God as a man in the sky stroking his long white beard, well, I don't believe in that either, But if you define God as love, it's like, well, you can see love all over around you, I mean, your very existence, like, why are you here on this earth? What are the chances, Just left up to chances, it just doesn't seem like it would ever be possible, but we are created out of love. And I think that was kind of the first stepping stone for me. It's like, okay, well, I believe in that. So then step one led to step two and step three and step four, ultimately to where I am today in my faith.
Yeah. And that love is intimacy too. And that had to uh, result in you having more intimate relationships with everybody. I mean, is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so on my Rite of Passage weekend, I had my dad, my grandfather, and two uncles. And I really feel like I could talk to any of those
Yeah.
four men about anything. Like there's no walls up, there's no facades. I feel like I can talk to those guys about anything.
What does that feel like today? I mean, you're still a relatively young guy. I mean, you know, how does that translate to everything that you're doing in your life?
You know, Now I'm married and I have two kids. So I think that having that example in those other four men in my life, it makes me feel like, okay, now it's my responsibility to be that type of man to my
Yeah.
kids, to my nieces, to my nephews, and to kind of carry on this tradition in my own family, but also hopefully share it with other families as well so that they can benefit from this rite of passage weekend, and it's in the same way that our family has.
Talk about the Rite of Passage weekend and what you guys do, how you organize it, what happens, and that type of thing.
Sure. So there's a number of elements. One, it occurs on a boy's 13th birthday. Um, 13, we argue, is kind of the magic number because he's officially
Yeah.
becoming a teenager.
Right.
The Jewish bar mitzvah occurs around the age of 13. And, admittedly, it is kind of on the younger side to initiate a boy into manhood, but we think that it's better to initiate a boy into manhood too early rather than too late, right? By the time a
What
boy's
is too early nowadays? Stephen, when you look at what's going on in our culture, some of these kids are being indoctrinated with things that certainly you and I don't believe in much younger than 13.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I would say it'd be interesting to look up the stats on this, but I would say that most 13-year-olds have already been exposed to pornography by that age, So giving them some support, giving them some sort of antidote,
Yeah.
to all
Yeah.
that is needed. And the sooner you can give it to them, the better.
Yeah. I've looked at these statistics. I don't have them at my ready right now, but it's actually younger than 13 where, and it only takes one glance to have you sucked in. And, cause the devil's really good at that. So, what has been your experience, with these rite of passage weekend and exposing, I'm going to say families, to this process?
So the rite of passage weekend, every one of my brothers and I all got one of these weekends.
Yeah.
And my male cousins and actually the female cousins of the family got these weekends as well. So everybody in my generation of the family got one of these weekends. And it was always a surprise for the boy or the girl. So I didn't know that my rite of passage weekend was coming until I turned 13. And my dad actually surprised me. We were going to go on this one-on-one father-son trip.
Yeah.
And we stopped at a breakfast diner on the drive up. And in the booth next to us was my grandfather and two uncles. And so it was a total surprise for me. And
Like
that's
Santa
when they told
Claus
me,
for you.
yeah, it was a total surprise. And that's when they told me this actually isn't a one-on-one trip with your dad, but this is going to be your rite of passage weekend. And at the end of this weekend, you will be considered to be a man in this family.
What was going through your head when they did that?
Total shock. I was totally surprised. I had no idea it was coming. Now, my older brother had a rite of passage weekend 2 years before me. So he kept it a secret from me as well. And even though it was a surprise, when they told me that at the end of this weekend I was going to be a man as well, that excited me. That made me feel good. It made me feel respected in the family. Like,
Yeah.
I might get more independence here. I think every 13-year-old is kind of like looking to spread his wings a little bit.
Yeah. So, what talk about your goal for this book and how I just think it's so important that fathers, given the things I see going on in the culture, it's just the same just junk that, I'm sure you see going on. Yeah. How are you guys trying to get this information out to people? Because I got to tell you, when Paul called me and said, man, I'm looking for a book. And he didn't just call me, by the way, Stephen, he called a couple of other people, and we were all like, that is a really good question. But these are conversations that I've had with other people. I actually said to Paul, I'm like, I think this means you and I are going to have to write a book. Is what I said to him. But how are you guys promoting this and getting this out there for fathers to take a look at this? Because this is just seems to me needs to be part of the family makeup so that your son's such a cool way to basically go to your son or your daughter and say, hey, you're an adult, and if you have questions, come to me. How are you guys really trying to get this out there? Because I just think it's so needed.
So the book is half of it is kind of a memoir, a story of our family and how the tradition got started, how it has affected our lives. But the whole second half of the book is really a how-to guide. It really walks a father through organizing one of these weekends for his own son. The other thing that we've done is that, our family in the last 20 years of organizing these weekends, we've accumulated a lot of, emails going back and forth to organize these things.
Sure.
And we realized, if we just clean this up a little bit, we could share this with our audience and give them the email templates to organize one of these weekends, explain what it is, why you want to do it, and exactly what the weekend is going to look like. So on our website, which is milestonetomanhood.com, you can go to the planning section and literally copy and paste these emails. So as a father, all you have to do is identify the men who you want to invite on this weekend, and then copy these emails and send them to them. And it will do all the explaining, all the legwork for you. You will have to pick a place, a venue, plan the food, all of that, of course. But as far as explaining the weekend and why you want to do it, we have that up there for free on our website.
Thank you for that. Wow, that is amazing. And I'll just tell the audience, if you're watching this on my YouTube channel, you're going to find a yellow button that says Milestone to Manhood. You won't be able to click on that link if you're watching the replay, but if you go in the show notes where we will put the website anyway, you will be able to get the link there. But and I want to encourage the audience to seek out this book and find more about this, and gather with other men. Use it at your church groups. Take it to your pastor. Take it to your small group. And I really want to encourage this, because this seems to be a missing ingredient in our society right now. I talk with a lot of men. They're just they just are begging when they were young for this type of weekend. Really, that kind of intimacy and time with their father that they may never have gotten, and that shaped their life. What are some I assume you guys have gotten a little bit of feedback, maybe from other men that have tried this out outside your family and done this. What's some of the feedback you've received?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, Mike, because the number one thing that fathers say when they hear about this is, first they say, "Oh, that's so cool. I wish my dad had done something like that for me."
Yeah.
And then the second thing they say is, "I'm definitely going to do this for my son." And we have had people do these rite of passage weekends outside of our family, and the feedback that we get is they're always happy that they did it. It does take a good amount of planning and organizing, because you are going to get a
Yeah.
number of people involved.
Yeah.
But every man says it was totally worth it, and that they see how it has impacted their son, even as at 13 years old. They say the boy holds his head up a little bit higher. He sees himself a little bit differently than his younger siblings. And the feedback that we've gotten has been definitely positive so far.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've not had the opportunity to look into the book yet. I'm going to bring this up on my screen again. If you're catching this on YouTube, tell everybody where they can get a hold of this book. I'm going to bring this up on my screen so everybody can see it there. The Milestone to Manhood book. How can people get a hold of the book? And
you can buy the book on our website, which is milestonetomanhood.com, or it's available on Amazon as well. Just type in Milestone to Manhood in the search bar and it should pop right up.
Yeah. I've got a link here. We're going to put that in the show notes as well, so that everybody can have an opportunity to go out and take a look at this. Stephen, before we wrap up the show today, I just want to make sure that we're spreading this message of rite of passage. Is there anything that you would leave us with today that maybe we didn't touch on?
Well, one thing is just going over what the weekend actually looks like. Most dads, when they hear about this idea of a rite of passage, they're all on board, but they're like, I have no idea what that even looks like, because
it requires some action, right?
Yeah, it's such a foreign concept to us nowadays, because society has gone away from rites of passages for 13-year-old boys.
Yeah.
So the weekend that we lay out in the book really centers around 7 different rituals. And these rituals are activities that you will participate in as a group to help the boy into manhood, to give him advice about what it really means to be a man, so that he doesn't form his idea of manhood from the internet or from TV or from his friends, but he's getting advice from good male mentors in his life. We have a scripture sharing exercise where every man picks out a scripture passage and shares it with the group. And that's really meant to be a way for the men to pass down their faith from one generation to the next. And then ultimately the last ritual that we engage in is the formal bestowing of the title of man. And that's when the father or the grandfather tells the boy, you in this family are officially a man now. And I would say that that's really the heart of the weekend. The heart of the weekend is one generation telling the next, you are a man now. Welcome to manhood. And I would say that if every father did that to his son at the appropriate age, of course, then this country and this world would be a much better place.
Brother, that is so true. I got to tell you, I just got chills when you said that, but it's just that big a deal. And I've been exposed to a lot of men, do a lot of retreat stuff. And boy, oh boy, a lot of the guys, they would just be ecstatic if they'd had that happen in their life. Sadly, most miss that opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, for me, growing up, I really thought that everybody had something like this. And because everyone in my family did. So I thought that this was a totally normal thing. And it wasn't until my early 20s when I had a friend who asked me to be the best man at his wedding.
Mm.
And it was a few months before their wedding day. And we were hanging out at his house. And he asked me, he had a lot on his mind thinking about becoming a new husband, becoming
Yeah.
potentially a father. And he asked me, he's like, hey, Steve, when was the first time that you considered yourself to be a man?
Oh,
And
wow.
I was like, well, let me tell you a story.
Was that just an organic question? I mean, it's kind of a softball for you.
It was a totally organic question.
Wow.
He was wrestling with this himself
Yeah.
in his early 20s.
Yeah.
I told him the story of what my family did for me, and he just looked at me like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I wish I had something like that." Now he has a 7-year-old son, and I'm still really close with this friend. So in 5 years, 6 years, we'll be doing a rite of passage for him.
Well, that's a great story, and it just speaks to the need, I think, that guys want. They want to be in community. They want to be in relationship. And when we are in relationship with each other, we're better for our families. And these are the types of gems that come out of it. This rite of passage, it's been around for ages. It's biblical. It's biblical, but somewhere along the line, other than, the Jewish community is always the one that comes to my mind. Other than the Jewish community in this country, I'm just not aware of this being a mainstream thing. And Stephen, maybe we need to start this.
Yeah, well, we're working on it with the book. My kind of big vision for it, what I would love to do is turn it into a 5 or 6 week program that churches could go through. Maybe the men's group at church could go through a 20-minute video and then some exercises after to help you prepare. And then at the end of the 5 weeks, you're fully ready to go on one of these weekends. So that's kind of my vision for it.
Well, I'll tell you, Stephen, we're going to pray for that vision because it's needed for families across this country. So, I hope you can get that up and running. Stephen, I want to just say how much I appreciate having you on today. And, if there's any way that we can help you here in the True Man world, we'd love to do that. Cause I just, I probably said it 100 times already on this show. It's just, I really do think it's important because we're a world at war, probably now more than we ever have been. And there are people fighting for the hearts of our children that shouldn't have any business fighting for our children. And if we don't take control, they will. And they'll do it gladly and willingly. So be the man you were called to be. Get Stephen's book, get educated on this. And if you have a son or a daughter, I encourage you to look at, what he has to offer and create a weekend for them. So Stephen, thank you so much for being on the True Man podcast today.
Mike, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for your words of encouragement. That means a lot coming from a guy like you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. We'll talk soon, Stephen.
Thanks.